So today we'll start with reference and revision. I'll just first tell you a simple concept of reference. It is very simple. Revision is a bit tougher in understanding, but reference is a very simple thing. See, reference is when a court is satisfied that when a case is pending before it and it involves a question as to validity of any act, ordinance or regulation or any provision contained in such, then he may send a reference to the High Court to decide on its validity or invalidity and to decide whether the act is invalid or inoperative. It can send a reference on this point. But there should not be a judgment of High Court to which that court which is sending reference to is subordinate. Let us suppose if the Delhi court thinks that in a particular case before him a certain provision of the statute or the certain act or ordinance or regulation is invalid or inoperative or unconstitutional. In those situations, it may send the proceeding to the High Court. To which High Court? Delhi High Court. He cannot send the proceeding to the Allahabad High Court. He has to send only to that High Court to which he is subordinate. Similarly, a judge in UP in the same facts will send his proceeding for reference to Allahabad High Court. He cannot send to any other High Court. And he has to see that such act, regulation or provision has not been declared by that High Court to which he is subordinate or by the Supreme Court to be invalid or inoperative, or its validity is not upheld. So if at all whatever reference he is sending to the High Court, which in his opinion he thinks is unconstitutional, and the High Court has upheld the constitutionality or the Supreme Court has upheld the constitutionality of that of that act or ordinance, whatever it may be, then in those situations the subordinate court cannot send a reference. Alright. So understand this. The words that you need to focus on: any court is satisfied that the case pending before it involves question as to validity, or you can also call it constitutionality if you may. Second is that the case should be pending before it and the decision, and it should be necessary to decide for the disposal of the case. This is the second most important element, that it should be necessary to decide for the disposal of the case, and the court which is sending the reference should be satisfied and he should record the reasons that why he thinks that a particular provision or particular act itself is invalid or inoperative. Alright. And there should not have been a previous judgment on the same point by the Supreme Court or by the High Court to which he is subordinate. If at all it's there, then the entire reference exercise is futile. The subordinate judge cannot on his whims and fancy may think that no, I think that particular provision is invalid, so I'll send a reference, or that a particular judgment upholding the validity of that particular act is wrong, so I'll send this judgment. No, subordinate judge cannot do that. Alright. So I'll come to the second clause of 395. Now this is where again Metropolitan Magistrate will come into the scene along with the Court of Session. The Metropolitan Magistrate and the Court of Session can also send a reference on any question of law itself. See, in section 1 of 390, subsection 1 of 395, when you are sending a reference, you are sending it because you think that a particular act or provision itself is invalid, unconstitutional. But under subsection 2, you can even send a reference on the matter of question of law. So what is the question of law? Let us suppose a Metropolitan Magistrate or Court of Session thinks that a particular evidence is admissible or not under the provision of Indian Evidence Act. He may have a doubt, and he couldn't find any judgment of the High Court or the Supreme Court on that point, or even of the Privy Council on that point, that whether a particular set of evidence is admissible in the court of law or not. If it is, under what provision? So he may send a reference on this point also. This is the question of law. But if, let us suppose, he had to question the constitutionality of the very act itself, then the reference can be sent only under 395 subsection 1. Only the Court of Session and the Metropolitan Magistrate are authorized to send a reference on the question of law itself. I just gave you one illustration of the question of law, decision as to admissibility of an evidence. that is a question of law. Relevancy of an evidence, that is a question of law. Alright. Now, I come to section 3. It says any court making a reference or under subsection 1 or 2 may, pending the decision of the High Court, either commit the accused to jail or grant him bail. So when the 396 says that whenever the High Court has answered the reference, the decision the decision of the subordinate court shall accord to the decision of the High Court, and the disposal shall be made accordingly. Alright. And the High Court may also decide by whom the cost of such reference are to be paid. So, if in a given case the magistrate erroneously sends the reference under 395 subsection 1, or a court of session or a metropolitan magistrate sends a reference on a question of law by mistake, and there is an authority by the same High Court and there is an authority on the same point by the Supreme Court, yet due to ignorance, Court of Session or the Metropolitan Magistrate ignores that, then the High Court may even impose the cost on those judges itself, that why were you not aware of it? Why didn't you find that case law properly? Or it was self-evident? Then the High Court may decide then who shall pay the cost. And there have been cases where a reference was sent in Andhra Pradesh, and the Andhra Pradesh High Court actually imposed the cost on the judge because he found that the question of law that the judge was asking was already answered by the Supreme Court. Alright, so there might be that sort of situation, and High Court may decide that who shall pay the cost. It can be the prosecution also, it can be the accused also, or the High Court may even say that the cost shall not be paid. Alright. So now I'll come to revision. Now it is very important that you first of all distinguish revision with appeal. The powers of the High Court while dealing with the revisional jurisdiction are limited and is to be distinguishable from the appellate jurisdiction. The revisional court has to only see the correctness, legality, propriety of any finding, sentence or order, and regularity of a proceeding. Alright. You need to focus on these words in the 397. The correctness, legality, propriety of any finding, sentence or order, and regularity of any proceedings. So, the power of revision in a general sense extends not only to consider and examine the legality of the orders, but correctness or propriety of the proceedings and the order passed. The court can, in appropriate cases, can go into the questions of fact to see the legality and propriety of the proceedings. So do not assume that it will be only be confined to the questions of law. Under the question of facts can also be gone into, but there has to be a satisfaction that that the revisional court is going into the legality of something. It is going into the question of fact to question the legality of it or propriety of the proceedings, not to determine or reappreciate the evidence on the question of fact. That cannot be done in the revisional proceedings. In the revisional proceedings, the court only goes into the question of fact to determine its legality, that is it, not for the purpose of reappreciation of evidence. If the revisional court finds that the conclusion arrived at by the subordinate court are without any basis or without any evidence, or are based upon inadmissible evidence, then the revisional court can set aside those orders. So the revisional court has to satisfy itself that the court below has decided a case on a legal and admissible evidence and is not swayed by considerations not relevant for the purpose of deciding the relevant questions before it. Then how do you decide what is relevant or irrelevant, and how do you decide what evidence is admissible or inadmissible? You decide it by the virtue of Indian Evidence Act. So let us suppose a subordinate judge is acting on the confession given to a police officer and has given a judgment on that basis. Then of course the revisional court can go into the question of fact whether this confession was given. If it was given, yes, then the court will say that under Indian Evidence Act section 25 prohibits proving of any confession given to a police officer. How can court allow it? Since it has admitted an evidence which was not admissible, then it will quash such confession and quash such proceedings, because the entire case was based on the confession to a police officer. Alright, things will be more clear regarding revisional jurisdiction when you understand the admissibility and the relevancy under the Indian Evidence Act and all the other provisions of law. But know this, why did the revisional court go into the question of fact of whether the confession was given or not for the purpose of malistration? Only to determine whether that confession was admissible or relevant or not. That is a question of legality. That is a question of legality. It goes into the question of fact to determine the question of legality or the propriety. Alright. It doesn't reappreciate it. It doesn't reappreciate evidence. While determining, let us suppose there is a witness and witness credibility is to be determined. Now the revisional court cannot go into the question whether the evidence of witness is reliable or it is worthy of credit, or why it is wrong because he was not present at a particular date, or he was not there at the scene of crime, or he is lying. These questions cannot be determined because there is no legality or propriety involved. Here the superior court or the revisional court is actually, what it's doing is actually reappreciating the evidence as an appellate court. It is not an appeal, it is a revision. Revision is only confined for legality, propriety, correctness of the proceedings, and mainly is confined to see that whether the subordinate court has remained within the bounds of its jurisdiction and authority and has not exceeded it. So revisional court cannot go into the question of sufficiency or insufficiency of evidence justifying the finding of fact arrived at, but it has the power to examine admissibility of evidence because it is a question of law, on the basis of which finding of fact was arrived at by trial court. So prejudice, there is a question will arrive regarding prejudice, because under 401 subsection 2 you will see that no order shall be made under this section, under 401, that tells you about the revisional powers, to the prejudice of the accused person or other person unless he has the opportunity of being heard either personally or by pleader in his own defense. So I'll tell you what is the definition of prejudice for the purpose of this section. The definition is, and generally the definition of prejudice is this only, it means to harm, to injure, or to put in a disadvantageous position. Alright, it also includes loss and injury. So the definition is relevant to understand the expression prejudice to an accused, and it is also relevant to understand the expression that no order to the prejudice of the accused could be passed in the revisional proceedings without giving him an opportunity of being heard. Alright. So first I'll start with the Since I'm done with the definition, I'll start with the reading of section 397. The High Court or the Session Judge may call for and examine the record of any proceeding before inferior criminal court situated within its or his local jurisdiction for the purpose of satisfying itself or himself as to correctness, legality, or the propriety of any finding, sentence, or order. So the correctness, legality, or propriety is there of any finding, sentence, or order. So it is a very wide thing. Recorded or passed. And as to regularity of any proceedings of any inferior court, and may, when calling for such record, direct that any execution of any sentence or order be suspended, and if the accused is in confinement, he may be released on bail or on his own bond pending the examination of the record. For the purpose of section 397, all magistrates, whether executive or judicial, be it your highest magistrate in the executive is district magistrate, the highest magistrate in judicial side is the chief judicial magistrate. So all the magistrate, whether exercising original or appellate jurisdiction, shall be deemed to be inferior to the sessions judge. They are inferior to the sessions judge for the purpose of revision and of section 398. The powers of the revision conferred by subsection 1 shall not be exercised in relation to an interlocutory order. Now there is a very big dispute as to what is interlocutory order. I'll elaborate on this nuance. But mark this, revisional powers cannot be exercised if there is an interlocutory order. Alright. Next is, if an application under this section has been made by any person, either to the High Court or the Court of Session, no further application by the same person shall be entertained by other of them. Alright, so section is now, I read the section. Now yesterday, you might be remembering that during the appeal proceedings, I was telling you that victim does not have a right to actually apply for enhancement of sentence, and it is only the state government under section 377 who has the right to apply for enhancement of sentence, right? And you have to read it with section 386, that the enhancement of sentence and altering of sentence so as to enhance the same can only be done when the proceedings for enhancement of sentence are going on. So now the question comes, if the subordinate court has given insufficient sentence and the state government does not apply for enhancement of sentence, then can such a thing allowed to be remained where a convict has been given a very lenient sentence, but by law he should be given a harsh sentence? Then what will you do in that situation? Of course, where there lies an appeal, there won't lie in revision. So can High Court suo motu, High Court or the Session Judge suo motu have the power to enhance the sentence where he sees under the exceptional circumstances that for the ends of justice or for the propriety or legality a higher sentence must be imposed? Can the High Court in the revisional jurisdiction can suo motu enhance the sentence? The answer is yes. Let there be no doubt in your mind that you can give an application to the High Court to exercise the suo motu power under 397. Alright. So the High Court can actually do that. It can enhance the sentence suo motu even though there is no pending appeal under section 377 of the CRPC for the enhancement of sentence. But for that purpose again, a notice has to be given, because this order for the enhancement of sentence, if the High Court thinks that it should be given, it will prejudice the accused. And since it will prejudice the accused, then section 401 will come into play. Subsection 2, it says no order under this section shall be made to the prejudice to the accused unless he has an opportunity of being heard by personally or pleader in his own defense. So opportunity must be given to him and he should be allowed to be heard. So how will you inform him that High Court is about to do such a thing? High Court has to send a notice, and the notice should afford the accused an adequate opportunity to give him an opportunity so that he can defend himself. And during those proceedings also he can also pray for reduction of a sentence also. That is there is no bar to that. He may argue that please reduce the sentence, even this sentence that has been imposed upon me is too much. Now that goes into the realm of fact and circumstances. What is the concept? Can the High Court do so in the revisional proceeding? Then the answer is yes, it can do so and exercise his suo motu power to enhance the sentence. But general rider is such powers should be exercised sparingly and in exceptional circumstances, and it cannot be exercised and should not be exercised without issuing the notice to the accused. Alright. And notice must be in writing, and notice for the enhancement must indicate why the court wants to enhance the sentence, and it must give the accused, the convict, the reasonable time to answer the notice. Alright, this position of law has been dealt with in Nadir Khan versus State of Delhi Administration on 3rd June 1975, but most people do not know about it. Next in line of the judgment that dealt with this position was Ekanath Shankar Mukhavar versus State of Maharashtra, 12th April 1977. And here also the Supreme Court said very categorically that we should at once remove the misgiving that the CRPC has abolished the High Court's power for the enhancement of sentence by exercising revisional jurisdiction suo motu. The provision of an appeal against inadequacy of the sentence by the state government or central government does not lead to a conclusion that the High Court's power of enhancement of sentence in appropriate cases by the exercise of suo motu power of revision is gone. It is very much still there and it can be exercised by the High Court. Alright. But always remember, if there are more than one accused on a same point and on a single case the High Court intends to enhance the sentence of every single one of them, then the opportunity of the hearing must be given to every single one of them. Alright. In fact, the general rule is that whoever will be prejudiced by this order, he should be given a notice and he should be given an opportunity of hearing. So, next in line of authority that I must deal with is, I'll come to the interlocutory part. See, that is a very big nuance, but I must first read till section 401. Power to order inquiry. On examining any record under 397 or otherwise, I might have explained this to you under section 203 of the CRPC when I was dealing with complaint and issue of process under 204. So, or discharge also. Power to order inquiry. On examining any record under 397 or otherwise, High Court or Session Judge may direct the CJM or any magistrate subordinate to him to make any CJM to make himself an inquiry or further inquiry into a complaint which has been dismissed under 203 or subsection 4 of 204. That is, what is that? That is dismissal because of non-payment of process fees, or in a case where a person, any accused of an offence, has been discharged, provided that no court shall make such a direction under this section for an inquiry in a case where any person who has been discharged, unless the person has an opportunity of showing cause why such direction should not be made. Now there is a very interesting thing. See, under CRPC scheme, the accused does not come into the picture until the process is issued to him. But in a revisional proceedings, if let us suppose the complaint is dismissed, so issue is not, the process is not issued to him. Even then, if the complaint is sought to be revised in the revisional jurisdiction, the accused will have an opportunity of hearing under 398 proviso read with 401 subsection 2. He will have that opportunity. So that is a very interesting thing, and do not fall into that trap that you might think that since the accused is not called into the picture because until the process is issued, it means that he does not have a right to hearing in the revisional proceeding also. No, it is there. Only in the trial court proceedings, he will not have a right until the process is issued. So even though complaint is restored to the file in the case of dismissal of complaint, let us suppose under the revisional court, after giving an accused opportunity of hearing, the revisional court thinks that the complaint is to be restored to the file, and he restores it. And after restoring it, the accused comes to the magistrate court and says that you, even though you have not issued process to me, since I have been given an opportunity of hearing before the revisional court, then I must also be given opportunity of hearing before you as well during the complaint proceedings, which are initiated before the issue of process. The answer for that is no. Even though he has a right of hearing in the revisional proceedings, that doesn't give him the right of hearing before the complaint proceedings. Alright, that principle is very crystallized. That is why when I was explaining to you complaint and all of this, I told you that the accused does not have a right to interfere at this stage because he is not called into the scene until and unless the process is issued. Alright, and I use the expression generally. This is why I use the expression generally, because under the revisional proceedings, which are the vertical proceedings, they move upwards. Trial court proceedings are horizontal proceedings. Alright, so the proceedings which move upwards, he has a right there for hearing by the virtue, if the revision is preferred, by the virtue of 398 proviso read with 401 subsection 2. He has that right. But in a horizontal proceedings before the criminal court which is considering the complaint or any other order, till the process is issued, he is not called into the scene. He has no right to be to interfere, cross-examine witnesses, etc., etc., or even adduce his own evidence to the judge. Not until the charges are framed. Till the point charges are framed, the accused cannot adduce the evidence in support of his own case, except the situation of sterling evidence point that I explained to you in the discharge case. Alright, that Nityanand and read with many other judgments, where if the evidence of sterling quality is present, then he may, and that is available with the prosecution, but the prosecution is not presenting it, then he may apply to the judge to force the prosecution to present that sterling evidence by the exercise of section 91. Of course, the judge has to be satisfied that why that order is necessary. But keep in mind, and I want to reiterate this principle again, that till the time during the proceedings before the trial court, till the process is issued and charges are framed, the accused does not have a right to adduce evidence or cross-examine witnesses of the prosecution. Alright, but in the discharge proceedings he get a rights to be heard, but his material of defense cannot be looked into. But before the process is issued to him, he does not even have a right to be heard. Alright, the right is not there. He does not come into the scene. CRPC does not envisage the accused to come into the scene and participate in the proceedings properly till the process is issued. But the same line of reasoning will not apply in a revisional case. Keep this in mind. Most people do not understand this concept, and they commit a blunder due to that. So, I will reiterate the case law on this point. Subhash Sahebrao Deshmukh versus Satish Atmaram Talekar, decided on 18th June 2020. It is very important to stay updated with the latest judgments. So, where a complaint is dismissed by the magistrate under 203 of the CRPC, upon challenge to the legality of the said order being laid by the complainant in a revisional petition before the High Court or the Session Judge, the person arraigned as an accused in a complaint have a right to be heard in a revision petition. This is the plain requirement of section 401 subsection 2 read with your section 398 proviso. If a revisional court overturns the order of the magistrate dismissing the complaint and the complaint is restored to the file of the magistrate and sent back for the fresh consideration, the person who are alleged in the complaint to have committed the crime, however, have no right to participate in the proceedings, nor are they entitled to any hearing of any sort whatsoever by the magistrate until the consideration of any matter by the magistrate for issuance of process. This is why I tell you the CRPC is complex. CRPC is not only a complex court, it has depth also. CPC does not have complexity, it has depth. CRPC has both complexity and depth. Complexity and depth are two different things. Alright, a situation may be complex, but it may be superficial. Understand that these are two different expressions. So, I'll move on to the next section before telling you what is an interlocutory order. In fact, during bail hearing also, during bail lectures also, I told you that what are interlocutory orders. But I'll reiterate again for your benefit. Sessions Judge powers of revision. In a case of any proceedings, the record of which has been called for by himself, the Sessions Judge may exercise all or any powers which are exercisable by the High Court under 401. Where any proceedings by the way of revision is commenced before a Session Judge, the provision of subsection 2, 3, 4 and 5 of 401, as the case may be, apply to such proceedings, and references in such section to the High Court shall be construed as the references to Session Judge. Where the application for revision is made on the behalf of any person before the Session Judge, the decision of the Session Judge thereon in relation to such person shall be final, and no further proceedings by the way of revision at the instance of such person shall be entertained by the High Court or any other court. I'll reiterate again, it is important for you to understand. where any application of revision is made by on behalf of any person before the session judge, the decision on session judge in relation to such person shall be final, and no further proceeding by the way of revision at the instance of such person, mark the word as the at the instance of such person, shall be entertained by the High Court or any other court. Similar point you find under 397 subsection 3. It says if an application under this section has been made by any person either to the High Court or the session judge, no further application by the same person shall be entertained by other of them. So that is only the extension of point. See, the words that you need to focus upon here are at the instance of such person. He cannot by himself apply, but of course it can request the revisional court to exercise its own suo motu powers. It can do that, but he cannot apply by himself for the revisional proceedings. Alright, not by his own name. He can only apply to the session judge or to the High Court to say exercise your suo motu powers, because I have exhausted my remedy of revision in a given set of facts. Alright. So that is why I told you to focus on these words at his instance. Power of additional session judge. If the case has been transferred to him by the session judge, he shall exercise all the powers of session judge during revision. Now, what are the powers of High Court of revision? Now we deal with the powers. In the case of any proceeding, the record of which has been called for by itself or otherwise come to its knowledge, the High Court may in its discretion exercise any of the powers conferred on the Court of Appeal by section 386, 389, 390, 391 or on the Court of Session by the section of 307, that is the power to grant pardon. And where judges composing the Court of Revision are equally divided in opinion, the case shall be disposed of in a manner provided in section 392. Of course, in that situation you understand the proceedings will be submitted to a third judge who will give his opinion thereon, etc., etc. Subsection 2 I have already read. Subsection 3 says, nothing in this section shall be deemed to authorize the High Court to convert a finding of an acquittal into one of conviction. So this is a very important thing that you need to understand. Even the powers of revision are very wide and they can be compared with the appellate powers, but here the High Court or the session judge is not entitled to convert a finding of acquittal into that of conviction. While if you look at the appellate proceedings, under the appellate proceedings, be it the appeal from conviction or be it an appeal from acquittal or enhancement of sentence, it is very open for him, for the appellate court to actually convert a finding of acquittal into that of conviction if he so wants. Or if he is so satisfied on the evidence before him, because it entitles him to reappreciate the evidence and many other things. But even though the legislature has said that the High Court can the High Court and the Court of Session can revise it, it is putting a rider. It is putting a rider, and the rider is that it cannot convert a finding of acquittal into one of conviction. So you got a fundamental difference. In an appeal from acquittal and in an appeal for enhancement of sentence or any other case, the High Court is entitled to actually either reverse such finding or convert a finding of acquittal into conviction if he so wants. He may do that. But in revision, he cannot do that. So here you also get a hint that there is a fundamental difference between the exercise of these powers. A very huge difference. So mark this subsection 3 also. Subsection 2 and 3 are very important. Where under this code an appeal lies and no appeal is brought, no proceeding by the way of revision shall be entertained at the instance of the party who could have appealed. So if the appeal lies and you did not bring an appeal, then you cannot prefer an revision, because the appeal in a certain sense is more elaborate exercise, because there you can reappreciate the evidence and you can do several other things. While under 397 revision, you are just confined to propriety, legality and the correctness of the order, sentence or finding. Then I come to subsection 5. It says, where under this code an appeal lies but an application for revision has been made to the High Court by any person, and the High Court is satisfied that such application was made under the erroneous belief that no appeal lies thereto, and that it is necessary in the interest of justice so to do. The High Court may treat the application for revision as a petition for appeal and deal with the same accordingly. Alright. So it is a curative petition that the High Court in its opinion, or the session judge in his opinion, if you read it with section 399, he may think that let us treat it as an appeal rather than treating it as a revision, but he has to be satisfied that such application was made on an erroneous belief. There is a one special thing also relating to the High Court, because High Court has the power of superintendence over all courts and tribunals within its jurisdiction under Article 227 except the Armed Forces Tribunal. So you under the CRPC, the power of superintendence over the courts of magistrate and all the other criminal courts is recognized by the way of section 483. So learn to read and interlink with those sections also. It is a one-line section, the power of superintendence over the court of magistrate, especially for the High Court. Session judge does not have this wide power. He can revise the order, but he does not have such a wide power under 483 that is present with your High Court. Alright. So what does section 483 says? Every High Court shall exercise superintendence over the court of judicial magistrates subordinate to it, as to ensure that there is an expeditious and proper disposal of cases by such magistrate. So proper disposal, not just expeditious, proper. And something can said to be proper only when it is legal and satisfy the procedural and substantive law requirements as well. So I'll just tell you now, since I've done the bare reading of the section, I'll tell you what is the interlocutory order. See, in Halsbury Laws of England, 3rd edition, volume number 22, in para 744, it has been defined what is an interlocutory order. An order which does not deal with the final rights of the parties, but either is made before the judgment and gives no final decision on the matters in dispute, but is merely on the matter of procedure. So the decision is only on the matter of procedure, or if it's made after judgment but merely directs how the declaration of right already crystallized in the final judgments are to be worked out, is termed as interlocutory order. They are not conclusive in nature. Always remember that. Okay? It is only conclusive regarding to your procedural or temporary matters. Let us suppose you pray for an adjournment. Then what is an adjournment? It does not decide your rights, does it? It only, adjournment is purely an interlocutory order. You cannot prefer a revision against this, because section 397 subsection 2 will prohibit it. Alright. So I will further elaborate what the Supreme Court has said on the interlocutory orders. Central Bank of India versus Gokul Chand. Supreme Court has said that the interlocutory orders are merely procedural and do not affect the right or liabilities of the parties in pending proceedings, and that they are merely steps taken towards the final adjudication and for assisting the parties in the prosecution of their cases in pending proceedings. So it is a step taken towards final adjudication or final orders, but by itself it is not a final order, and it does not affect the right and liabilities of the parties, and it's procedural in nature. Alright. Again, in VC Shukla versus State represented through CBI, Supreme Court said that the term interlocutory order used in 397(2) relates to various stages of the trial, namely inquiry, trial or other proceedings. The object seems to be to cut down the delays in the stage through which a criminal case passes before it and culminates into acquittal, discharge or conviction. Having regard to the very large ambit of the CRPC, the expression interlocutory order would have to be given a broad meaning as to achieve the object of the court without disturbing or interfering with the fairness of trial. The term interlocutory order is to be understood and taken to mean something opposite of the final order or something converse of the term final order. The essential attribute of an interlocutory order is that it merely decides some point or matter essential to the progress of the suit or collateral to the issue sought, but it is not a final decision or judgment on the matter under issue. Again, in Amarnath versus State of Haryana, I have told you this judgment before also, I will reiterate that under section 397 subsection 2, it has been used, the term interlocutory order has been used in a very restricted sense. It is not used in a wide sense. It merely denotes order purely interim or temporary in nature, which do not decide or touch upon the important rights or liabilities of the parties and relates to procedure only. And any order which substantially affects the right of the parties, by that definition, cannot be termed to be an interlocutory order. Alright, so what can we gather from these many definitions? That it is temporary in nature, it is procedural in nature, it is collateral to the main issue, it does not decide on the rights and liabilities of the parties or substantial rights and liabilities of the parties. Alright, so I'll give you an illustration. If an order is given for summoning witness, it is an interlocutory order. If an order is given for adjourning a case, it is an interlocutory order. Passing an order of bail, interlocutory order. Because it doesn't decide the question whether the accused is guilty or not, right? And that is a substantial question. Calling for the reports. Let us suppose the court calls for post-mortem reports or ballistic report. Then can it be said to affect the important rights and liabilities of the parties? No. Or any other steps in the aid of pending in proceeding or investigation, etc. If it's an interlocutory order like this, of course I cannot lay down exhaustively what is considered under this definition, but you get an idea. Alright. But discharge or non-discharge or acquittal or conviction, are they interlocutory in nature? The answer is no. Acquittal and conviction is not an interlocutory order, it is a final order or judgment. Alright. So, you need to keep these things in mind, that it is only an order which is of temporary and procedural in nature. So, you have to understand the code on its broad principles. That the broad principles is that the final order or the orders which affect the rights and or liabilities of the parties, or let us suppose the court recorded a very important finding in a judgment. And let us suppose on a given set of facts it has admitted an evidence that was inadmissible, and hence what it has done, not only it has prejudiced the accused, but the legality of the order is questionable. So in those situations what will happen? A revision lies. Why revision lies? Because the question of finding that the court has admitted an evidence which was inadmissible by law, not only it has prejudiced the accused, it has decided upon an important issue of liability of the accused. So that cannot be termed to be an interlocutory order, and your that lies, revision lies. Alright. So, but against an adjournment order under 309 of the CRPC for calling witnesses for the prosecution or defense, this doesn't lie. Your revision does not lie. Alright. Then I come to KK Patel versus State of Gujarat and another. Then court said the sole test to decide whether an order is interlocutory or not is whether such order was passed during interim stage, but the feasible test to decide upon that is if at all the revisional courts uphold the objection raised by a party, it will result in culminating the proceedings. So basically, in other words, the Supreme Court means that the test that the revisional court should have to decide whether an order is interlocutory or not is to see if the revisional courts decides that issue in one way or the other, would the entire proceedings be terminated, or would the entire sentence order of propriety will be terminated or not. So that should be the test. I know it doesn't explain anything much to you, but because you have to read it a lot to understand upon things. So that is why I gave you an illustration of adjournments and calling of witnesses, calling for post-mortem ballistic reports, or sending the reports for the handwriting witnesses, etc. etc. These minor matters, they are purely interim in nature, they are purely procedural in nature, they do not decide the rights and liability of the parties. So culmination of proceedings by the the expression culmination of the proceedings by the Supreme Court actually means by that is that proceedings will terminate, will be over. And the proceedings do not mean that the entire trial will be over. That finding, sentence of order which is being sought to be revised in the Superior Court, that proceeding will be over. All right, not the trial. Always remember, proceeding is a very wide term. So now there is a nuance, a small one. I don't think anybody would ask you, but if they do, I want you to be prepared. The remedy against summoning order under section 204 of the CRPC, that is issue of process. So in brief, I will tell you the 4 points. I will give you the reasoning of 4 points, but I'll just tell you the 4 points that you need to remember. Order of issuance of process under section 204 CRPC is not an interlocutory order. Alright. Revision under 397 CRPC is maintainable against an order of issuance of process. Then, remedy against order of issuance of process under 204 CRPC also lies under 482 of the CRPC. And fourth point that I want to tell you is that a magistrate cannot recall his order under 204 CRPC because it will amount to review, and as you know, under 362 of the CRPC, a review is barred. So why am I saying that there is a nuance in this section? Because there was this case, Adalat Prasad versus Rupalal Jindal and others. In that, what happened, that Supreme Court said that the only remedy against the summoning order under section 204 of the CRPC is to invoke the inherent power of the High Court under 482 and get it quashed. And the magistrate cannot call it. So people started thinking, and similar was the case in Subramaniam Sethuraman versus State of Maharashtra. So what happened because of this judgment was that people started thinking that you cannot approach the revisional court for the order of issuing of process. So that was a problem because this Adalat, and it arose because there was a misreading of Adalat Prasad versus Rupalal Jindal. Why was it there? Because if you look at the ratio of the judgment, the ratio decidendum of the judgment, it says that the only question that the Supreme Court was dealing with at that time was that whether the magistrate who has issued process could also recall the process that he has issued under 204. That was the question that it was considering. The Supreme Court was not considering this question, whether the revision application is maintainable or whether the procedure under inherent power is maintainable under 204 CRPC. Alright, that was the confusion and misreading in the Adalat Prasad. Supreme Court was only confined with the question that that the magistrate cannot recall the order once he has issued process, and you have to approach the High Court to quash it under 482. It was not dealing with the question whether the revision lies or not, and I'll demonstrate how the revision will lie. Again, another important judgment, which was Subramaniam Sethuraman, which reiterated the same position, Subramaniam Sethuraman versus State of Maharashtra. In that, what was the ratio of the judgment? In the Subramaniam Sethuraman case, the consideration and the ratio of the judgment and the issue before the Supreme Court was that whether the decision in the case of Adalat Prasad would require reconsideration. Alright, whether the decision in the case of Adalat Prasad requires reconsideration, it has to be reviewed, or the issue has to be decided by the larger bench. Because in the case of Adalat Prasad, the Supreme Court proceeded on the basis that the case was summons case, but in reality it was a warrant case covered under chapter 19 of the CRPC. That was the question which arose for consideration. Again, the issue for consideration before the Supreme Court was whether the magistrate could recall the order issuing process, and whether the Adalat Prasad case requires reconsideration or not. So Subramaniam Sethuraman also did not go into the question whether the revision application would lie or not. It reiterated the ratio of Adalat Prasad, said the remedy lies under 482. It never sought to say that that revision does not lie at all, because that question never came before the Supreme Court itself. Never, in the judgments, the only point that these two judgments were confined with, that whether they can whether the magistrate can call back the order of issue of process, and whether the judgment given in Adalat Prasad Subramaniam Seethuraman case, whether the judgment in Adalat Prasad requires reconsideration or not. So both courts answered that you can prefer the quashing proceedings under 482. So why am I saying that the revision lies? First of all, I have demonstrated that the question for revision was not under the consideration there. Alright, that since it was not the part of the ratio, since it was not the issue that was considered by the Supreme Court, then we have to understand it on the basis of the ratios. Alright, you might have heard that it is the ratio decidenti which binds the subordinate courts, or all the courts, not the obiter dicta. So here, since the Supreme Court never went in the question of revision, then on what basis I am saying that the revision lies? Of course, by pursuing the judgment of Adalat Prasad and Subramaniam Seethuraman, it is very clear to you that 482 application does lie to quash the issue of process, and the magistrate obviously cannot recall the process. But there were the cases where the Supreme Court answered that revision application does lie. And what were those cases? Amarnath versus State of Haryana. In that case, this question came up directly before the Supreme Court, whether the impugned order of a judicial magistrate for summoning the accused can be said to be an interlocutory order or not, or whether or not it falls within the mischief of 397(2), and therefore whether a revision would lie under 397 of the CRPC or under 482 of the code. Here the Supreme Court answered that the revision would lie. It is not an interlocutory order. Order summoning an accused is not an interlocutory order, and a revision proceeding would lie under 397 of the CRPC. Then next in line of the judgment was your Madhulimai versus State of Maharashtra, AIR 1978, Supreme Court page number 47. Supreme Court considered the very issue whether the revision against the order taking cognizance or issue of process or framing of the charge was maintainable. The Supreme Court observed in the para 10 that the order taking cognizance or issue of process is not an interlocutory order. And since it's not an interlocutory order, you know what it means. It means the revision lies. Then Dhariwal Tobacco Products Limited versus State of Maharashtra. The apex court once again reiterated the same position. Indisputably, the issuance of summons is not an interlocutory order within the meaning of 397 of the code. Since the issue relating to revision and the process of issuing the process to the accused person was directly in the question, in these cases, then these cases categorically lay down the law that the revision application does lie. But again, one point of difference that I want to reiterate, that even though revision in this case lies, even then you can also prefer a quashing petition under 482 of the CRPC under the inherent power of the High Court. So you might have heard that I've always told you that generally inherent power is not exercised in the derogation of the statute, and it's true, it is not exercised in the derogation of statute, but it is a general principle, and it is akin to a self-imposed restraint, because if at all court finds that the abuse of the process of the court is being taken, then notwithstanding that there is a statutory prohibition for dealing with the interlocutory orders, the High Court in its inherent power can, in order to stop the abuse of the process of the court, can even quash or look into the matters of interlocutory orders as well, and then your 397 subsection 2 will not operate as a bar for it. It would not say that since the revisional court cannot revise the interlocutory order, how can the High Court revise it under section 482? Because what cannot be done directly cannot be allowed to be done indirectly. But this issue has also been clarified that in exceptional circumstances it can be allowed. See, the very reason I never told you earlier this, and I actually use the expression generally earlier when I was earlier telling you about the inherent power generally is not to be exercised in the derogation of the statute, because you need to first in point of time you need to understand what is the general rule. You will always claim the general rule, you will never start with the exceptional rule. When you have first dealt with the general rule, then you come to the exceptions. You never start with the exceptions, otherwise what it does, it casts a enthralling effect in your mind, and you will be always be thinking in exceptional terms, and due to that you might solve many problems, legal problems, in a wrong manner, or may even commit an error or a gross error while dealing with a question in exam or even in practice. So that is why you need to know that an exceptional proviso is confined to a very limited things. Now the time has come that I'll tell you that in what situations the inherent power is different from the revisional powers, and what it is true scope thereof in a certain sense. I will not be dealing elaborately with inherent power, but you need to understand it a bit. See, it would not be asked in the exam, so if you are not too bothered about it, you do not need to know it in detail, but it is very essential for practice purpose and for Delhi Judicial Service and for Delhi Higher Judicial Service as well. So first case I'll tell you is CBI versus Ravi Shankar Srivastava. Supreme Court held that in exercise of power under section 482 of the CRPC, it is in a nature an exception and not the rule. Alright. So the Supreme Court has itself said that the exercise of inherent power is itself an exception, not the rule. The section does not confer any new powers on the High Court. It only saves the inherent power of the High Court which it has already possessed. So always remember, inherent power are not conferred. Legislature does not give the court inherent power. The courts always has the inherent power. Alright. It just allows, yes, you can exercise it, because no legislature can just understand or create a provision for all sorts of things that might come in the future. That is why inherent powers are saved of the court. And because judiciary is a sovereign wing of the state, that's why some residual and inherent power are with it. So it envisages, 482 envisages 3 circumstances under which the exercise of inherent jurisdiction may be exercised. First is to give effect to an order under the CRPC. Second is to prevent the abuse of the process of the court, and third is to otherwise secure the ends of justice. Then why? Because no legislative enactment dealing with a procedure can provide for all cases that may possibly arise. So next elaboration is done by Supreme Court in Bindeshwari Prasad versus State of Bihar, जो वो part of Bihar है जो अब झारखंड बन गया है. The High Court is not justified in section for inherent power proceedings to reappreciate the evidence on record and coming to a different conclusion in a revision preferred by the informant under 401, because your inherent power proceedings are not the proceedings of revision, because if the revisional proceedings are limited in a sense that they cannot convert a finding of acquittal into one of conviction, then the High Court cannot resort to the inherent power to convert the finding of acquittal into one of conviction by thinking that okay, I cannot convert the finding of acquittal into conviction by the way of revision, so I'll convert the finding of acquittal into one of conviction by the way of exercise of my inherent power. It cannot do that, because what it does is that it is doing something directly, which it is doing something indirectly which is not allowed to be done directly. That is the first principle that you need to understand. Secondly, the second principle being that even though the High Court or any revisional court cannot revise an interlocutory order, but at the same time it must be borne in mind that section 482 is merely about the policy of law, that generally inherent powers are not exercised in derogation of the statute. Where the High Court finds that the interlocutory order or an order which is something more than an interlocutory order, but it is not a final order which decides on the right or liability of the parties, because there also are some sorts of order which are something more than an interlocutory order but something less than a final order. There can be such orders. In those situations, if the High Court finds that there is an abuse of the process of the court, or for the ends of justice, or for securing the ends of justice, it is utmost essential that inherent power should be exercised, then in appropriate case the High Court can exercise its inherent power. But of course there has to be circumstances like that. To reiterate the words of Justice Krishna Iyer, the abuse of the process of the court or other extraordinary situation excites the court's jurisdiction under 482. The limitation is self-restraint, nothing more. Since section 397 of the CRPC is attracted against all orders other than interlocutory, a contrary view would limit the availability of the inherent powers under 482 CRPC only to a petty interlocutory orders, a situation wholly unwarranted and undesirable. So, Supreme Court has said that in a given situation, if the circumstances so calls, in Prabhu Chawla versus State of Rajasthan also this position what I am telling you is reiterated, and the same point was also held in the same State of Punjab versus Devinder Pal Bullar Singh. Alright. So, the authority of the Supreme Court is very much backed by precedents and also the logical construction of the CRPC, and whatever I am arguing before you, whatever I am asserting before you is backed by the precedential value of the Supreme Court judgments. So you need to understand these two general principles. That first, your inherent power is to be not exercised in derogation of the statute, because what cannot be done directly cannot be allowed to be done indirectly. Alright, if the statute provides a specific bar, you generally do not exercise inherent power in the derogation of the statute. Yet, if there is an abuse of the process of the court, or for the ends of justice, it is of utmost importance that the High Court should exercise its inherent power, then it can just lay down its self-restraint and exercise in its inherent power, even in the cases where it finds that the order is something more than an interlocutory order, or it's merely an interlocutory order. But it has to record a finding that it is necessary for protection of the ends of justice or for preventing the abuse of the process of the court. Then again, in State of Punjab versus Devinder Pal Singh Bullar, Supreme Court said the inherent powers of the High Court are not conferred but are the ones which the High Court already has in it, and the court merely preserves this power. CRPC preserves this power. Section 397(3) of the CRPC is just a bar as to result in a speedy trial and prevent unnecessary delay and multiplicity of the same proceeding. I think Supreme Court has made a mistake here, because it is not 397(3), it is 397(2) which talks about the interlocutory order. So it happens. If the Supreme Court can make such a big mistake, do not be afraid of making any mistake. Of course, learn from your mistakes, but do not just keep reiterating it again and again, or repeating it again and again. So in Madhulimay versus State of Maharashtra also, a 3-judges bench was considering the scope of the power of the High Court under 482 and section 397(2) of the CRPC. Supreme Court held that the bar on the power of revision was put in order to facilitate and expedite the disposal of cases, but in section 482 it is provided that nothing in this code, which would include section 397(2) of the CRPC also, shall be deemed to limit or otherwise affect the inherent powers of the High Court. And after harmoniously construing both of the provisions, it was held that the High Court has no power of revision in an interlocutory order. Still, the inherent power will come into play when there is no provision for readdressal of the grievance of the aggrieved party, and the High Court finds that the abuse of the process of the court is being taken place, and for the ends of justice, High Court in its opinion believes that this power should be exercised. Now keep in mind, I am telling you a very exceptional situation which very few people know about. So keep this in mind, that mostly people will be unaware of these situations. That is why I am making you people aware of this situation, so that you are a class apart from everyone else. So what happened in Madhulimai? In Madhulimai, that there was some allegations of defamatory statements. It was published in a newspaper against the law minister. The state government decided to prosecute the appellants for the offence under section 500 IPC, that is for defamation. Then after obtaining the sanction, a complaint was made by the public prosecutor, and cognizance of the commission of the offence was taken, and the trial was taken to the sessions court by the virtue of section 199 subsection 2, and it was tried directly in the sessions court. Thereafter, the appellant in this case, which is Madhulimai, he filed an application to dismiss the complaint on the ground that court has no jurisdiction to entertain the complaint. The sessions judge rejected all the contentions of him and framed the charges. The order of the session judge was challenged in the revision proceedings in the High Court. On a preliminary objection, the maintainability of the inherent power petition was questioned, and the Supreme Court held categorically that the power of the High Court to entertain a revisional petition was not taken away under 397 or by the inherent power under 482, and then it just explained you the very point that I just explained to you right now, that even though these provisions may overlap, but where the High Court believes that the ends of justice are being defeated, or the abuse of the process of the court is being taken place, then it can also even entertain interlocutory orders under 482. But generally, what is the general rule? Always remember the general rule. You have to, in exams, write all the time that generally the general rule is this, that inherent powers cannot be exercised in the derogation of the statute. So generally, High Court will not go into the questions of inherent power. In fact, you will in practice also see that generally, if you try to question interlocutory orders in inherent power proceedings, the court will dismiss your case. But if you are able to show that the abuse of the process of the court is being taken place, then in those situations, in those particular situations, High Court, and these are very rare and exceptional situations, the High Court may entertain even your plea of interlocutory order or any order it may think fit. Alright. Again, in Ganesh Narayan Hegde versus S. Bangarappa, it was held that it is true that availing the remedy of revision to the session judge under 397, it will not bar a person from invoking the power of the High Court under 482. It is equally true that the High Court should not act as a second revisional court under the garb of exercising inherent power. While exercising inherent power, the High Court must be cautious of the fact that the session judge has declined in his revision jurisdiction in the matter, and the High Court should only interfere when it is satisfied that if the compliant is allowed to proceed with, it would amount to abuse of the process of the court or the interest of justice, otherwise call for quashing of the charges. So generally you cannot prefer revisional proceedings again and again. You can only prefer it one on a given set of facts, on a given set of order. But if you try and avail the remedy of inherent power, then generally the parameters for the High Court are this. The High Court has to think that it is not a second revisional court while exercising inherent power. It has to see whether the abuse of the process of court is being indulged into, or whether it is necessary for the ends of justice that he should exercise this power. Ends of justice is a very wide term, very, very wide term. It includes almost everything. But it is determined on the facts and circumstances. If the ends of justice says, after looking at the FIR, that the FIR should be caused and the entire case should be quashed, or the charges should be quashed before the prima facie offence is not being disclosed, even though revisional court does not think so. But the High Court thinks that in the interest of justice is necessary, then in those cases it can exercise that power under 482. So these are the few nuances where 397 and your 401 overlap that gets people confused often. If let us suppose, I'll give you another other illustration, one more illustration. You know that a judicial magistrate cannot give an order for CBI to investigate under 156 subsection 3 of the CRPC, right? That order can be only be given to SHO. So if a judicial magistrate gives an order of investigation to CBI, and let us suppose Sessions Judge does not revise his order, which he should, because the order is illegal. Legality is questioned, right? In 397, the order is illegal. He should revise it. And you know that now you cannot approach a higher forum at your own instance. You can only apply for suo motu proceedings, but that is not your right. The higher court may dismiss it if it so wants. But you can apply for 482 inherent power. So if you apply for 482 inherent power and High Court, and the grounds is taken before the High Court that no, since the revision has been dealt with, the High Court cannot exercise inherent power in derogation of the statute because the matter has been already been dealt with in the revisional proceedings, then that would defeat the ends of justice, right? And it is the abuse of the process of the court. Because why it is the abuse of the process? Because it is by the exercise of the procedural law that the magistrate gives the direction for investigation, right? And if that procedural law is to be abused, that is why you are giving an order to CBI. And you know, in the federal system of the country, usually state government is to make request to the central government to investigate the crimes inside the state. Otherwise, CBI has no independent power to investigate. Other than that, the High Court or the Supreme Court may its own in constitutional powers under Article 32 read with 142 in the case of Supreme Court, and your Article 226 in the case of High Court. They do have the power to order CBI to investigate the case. That is independent of the state government's opinion. But if the magistrate is to abuse the process of the court and merely by following the rules, you might think that these rules are sacrosanct, and even though abuse of the process is going on, but because the revisional proceedings have already been disposed of, the inherent power cannot be exercised. No, this line of reasoning will not apply, and the High Court properly, for the sake of my illustration, will have to quash the proceedings of the magistrate, and it has to direct the magistrate. You cannot direct the CBI. You have to direct the SHO of the area concerned. See, the rules of CRPC, and especially in the case of inherent power, the High Court is not to act like Bhishma Pitama, that whatever adharma is taking place and whatever the atrocities and sins are taking place, but because the High Court is bound by the certain rule book because of the traditions or precedents or by the legislative statutory enactments, it has to act like Bhishma Pitama and let the injustice take place and let all of these problems take place and be a silent spectator even though he thinks that it's wrong. No, if the High Court finds that there is an abuse of the process of the court, ends of justice are being defeated, then know this, there is no injustice which the High Court cannot reach, and it will rectify any errors, notwithstanding a statutory provision. But it is a very, very, I'll reiterate again, exceptional scenario, not the general scenario. In exams, you generally don't mention this point because your examiner might not be knowing this, because most of the lawyers do not know about these case laws, about these precedents which has been established. Only a very senior lawyers knows about it. So I have told all of you this, but there is a proper time and place where you exercise your competence of academic skills and your legal skills. So in practice you can exercise these legal skills. While writing an article, while writing an academic report, you can exercise these legal skills. But for the purpose of judicial exams, no. For the purpose of judicial exams, you have to only be confined what is revision, what is interlocutory order, how is interlocutory order different from final order, how is it different from appeal, what are the general rules of revision. That's it. It is very simple. For the sake of exam, it is very simple. For the sake of everything else, it is very complex and difficult. If you are appearing for Delhi or Delhi Higher Judicial Service, then in those situations you need to know this difference, because this difference can be asked. In UP, Uttarakhand and other states of Bihar, this difference, because the level of exam is not that tough, this difference will not be asked. Alright, so this is primarily for practice purpose, the difference in inherent power and the situations where they overlap, and your revisional cases where these proceedings in interlocutory order, how they cross in scope. These are primarily things for Delhi Judicial Service, Delhi Higher Judicial Service, and for practice purpose, nothing else. Alright, so your revisional chapter is done, and primarily your CRPC is done. Now I will take some off topic for today is Wednesday, so Thursday, Friday I'll take some off topics regarding, I think, pardon and your commutation of sentences, and after that I'll give you a buffer week of 1 week where you have to, if any amount of lectures that you want to see, you see it right now. 1 week is given to you. After that they will be deleted. Alright, so we are done with revision now, because after that 1 week, next 1 week we'll start with IPC. Alright, so that's it for today.